Why do they matter in the context of like the global politics?
Obviously, it increases the cost for companies that are sourcing goods. And we've become so globalized. Our economy is just like the supply chains are unfathomably complex and interdependent, and they're full of independent actors making their own decisions about how they want to do things. And there's these subcomponent ecosystems of supply, moving goods all over the world and doing assembly and production in different countries and bringing things together. So introducing massive changes on short notice to the tariffs has caused borderline chaos, certainly a lot of disorder in global supply chains, which ultimately affects all the stuff that we buy. It's not true that America doesn't make anything anymore, but like a lot of the kind of consumer goods that are all made over, a lot of them are made overseas, obviously.
I mean, you talk to a lot of customers. Are people onshoring, or are they just sort of accepting, or what's happening?
Well, that's the thing. I think you have to judge policies not by their intention, but by their outcome. Like one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is like, oh, there's good intention, so therefore the policy is fine. And that's just not right. And these tariffs have had the opposite impact that Trump would like. I think there's intention. There's some validity to it all, like some of the things I said, from national security and employment, other things. But the result has been thus far, and it's pretty early in the cycle. We're only a couple months since the Liberation Day or whatever. But I've met infinitely more. I haven't met anyone who said, oh, because of these tariffs, I'm going to start doing production in the U.S. I've read some headlines on it, and they've done some White House announcements and things, but like those aren't my customer base. In my customer base, met at least a half a dozen companies that said stop production in the U.S. because of the cost of the components coming in.
Oh, interesting.
And there's kind of like three categories of these, two or three. One is people, for example, we have a company that makes bicycles in the U.S., kids' bikes. And for some reason, they made an exemption for importing bikes that are duty-free, but not bike components. So their costs went way up, and their competitors from overseas didn't. So they're cheaper to manufacture overseas. So they're moving their factory that like has been a well-known brand, reasonably well-known brand, known for being made in America, and they're like, doesn't work anymore. So that's one example. Two is if you're doing it for export, if you're exporting goods, you're paying, your costs have gone up on the import of the goods, of the components, doing assembly in the U.S. and then exporting. You're better off setting up that factory now somewhere else where you don't have the costs on the imported components. Third would be machinery costs. So like, in fact, a friend of mine was setting up a line for a fab, like a semiconductor fab. And just decided, like the machines are made in Germany for that particular line. And the cost was going to go up 30%. He's like, oh, all right, I'll just build this line somewhere else in another country.
And there's all sorts of like hedges and ways around this. Like one would, I think a bonded warehouse is you don't actually technically pay the tariff until you take it out of, so it's landed in the United States, but you don't pay the tariff until it comes out of the bonded warehouse.
Yeah, it's temporary though. You're still going to pay the tariff. So it doesn't really work for like changing the nature, but a bonded warehouse will let you make a bet that tariffs are going to come down. So when tariffs were at 145 on China, we helped a lot of companies move into bonded warehouses because we all predicted that it would come down from there. So you're better off waiting and only enter the goods, only exit them out of the building, but enter them into the U.S. commerce after the tariffs have come down. So there's some hacks around the edges. There's a lot that you need to do. Before you didn't care about valuation, the value of the goods. If it was times 0, who cares?
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden, if it's times 30% or whatever number, you care a lot more of how is it valued. And there are all kinds of legal ways, and you need to get really great advice on legal advice or trade advisory on how to do this. But there are ways tracking that. You want to be able to really track every single component of the product. Where is it made? And what is its cost? So like if you have a couch, there's steel and aluminum duties right now. They're really high. Forget the exact number, but they're quite high. I think 50% or more on Chinese made steel and aluminum. Maybe I should know all these details. It's very complex. But if you have a couch that has steel and aluminum, you don't want to pay that 50%. You don't want to pay that high duty on the entire couch. You want to only pay it on the portion that's steel and aluminum. So you really have to build this great, we call it a product library, which Flexport offers as technology products. So you want to be able to track all these things at the subcomponent level. Where's every item made? And then there's all these new regulations that have been coming out for many, many years. There's one called the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. Requires you to track the cotton, anything cotton, where was it made, specifically like what down. And then The EU has new ones very similar, but any forestry, any wood product, you'll be able to show where the wood was grown anywhere in the world. Track that.
This is insanely complex.
Yeah. Carbon, they want to know the carbon border adjustment factor, I think it's called that. They want to know all the carbon inputs of every single subcomponent of every product in the world, how much carbon went into making it, so they can measure the carbon footprint. And in the EU, coming soon, you're going to have to provide a QR code on every item that you can scan, and they'll tell you the carbon footprint. So the world just keeps getting more and more complex, which plays into the hands of customs companies like Flexport, because they're like, cool, you need technology to track all this stuff. Kind of classic regulatory capture type stuff. We're not lobbying for any of these things, but
and you're the most tech forward of all the companies.
Kind of, we're the only one in the top 100 in the world founded after the web browser was invented. A lot of good companies, but they're not tech companies fundamentally. So we have to, the world is our oyster. We should win it all.
Are there any sort of creative strategies you've seen any of your customers use that you're like, oh, that's novel or interesting?
You have to be careful. There's some illegal stuff that I see. Not so much of our customers. We talk them out of this, but one of the temptations that a lot of people are falling into right now is letting your factory import the goods for you and then buying it from them in the US and then not turning a blind eye if the factory cheats on the value of the goods or their classification. That's kind of rampant in the industry right now.
That's just a matter of time before, I would imagine. Who regulates that?
Customs and Border Protection, and DOJ. Their problem is what the factories will do is set up a shell company. Not in the U.S. You don't have to have a U.S. entity to import goods into the U.S.
Oh, interesting.
You can just, or Canada or most of Western Europe. So you can just, they set up this shell company in whatever country. It could be China, it could be anywhere. That company registers not as an LLC or any kind of legal entity, but they just register with CBP, with customs. They import the goods into the U.S. from abroad. If they cheat, they just disappear, and customs doesn't have agents in China to go chase it down. So then they just do it again under a different shell company. And that's a huge amount of what gets sold on Amazon. It's not I'm not saying it's fraudulent, but it is these foreign registered companies.
It's definitely like a gray area. Do you think they'll bring that back?
I think they're going to crack down on that. I think they're going to shut down that.
And make it so you have to be a U.S. entity to import.
That's a created LLC. It can be foreign owned LLC, but you'll have to have like an LLC that can be held accountable. But it's very unclear exactly how it will be or should be structured. Like, does it need to have employees who could face jail time? Like, what does it need to have a certain amount of cash in the bank that could be taken if there's fraud? There's a lot of ways, but I have no idea what's going to pass. There's a couple, I understand there's a few bills like looming, but I haven't read the text of them yet in Washington that would shut down the ability for foreign companies to import or put in new requirements for it. So that's like one creative thing that what'll happen is you get offered as an importer, you've been buying these goods from your factory, and then all of a sudden they offer them to you for way cheaper than the duty alone. You're like, yeah, it's not my problem. I just bought it in the U.S. Guarantee you, like, you are reliable for that. Like, as a warning, look at the camera. CBP, DOJ has announced it's their number 2 priority in white collar crime division of the Department of Justice is customs fraud. After healthcare fraud is number 1, and then customs fraud number 2.
Are there any other creative strategies we can sort of put out there in the world today that you've seen not your customers use?
Yeah, well, the good strategies, let's not talk about the illegal ones anymore. I mean, but be careful. Make sure you're getting good advice. Is have that database, know all the subcomponents. There's a few things like valuation. There's a thing called first sale. I won't bore you all with the technicalities of it, but it's called first sale, which basically says that you pay the value of the goods based on the first time it was sold, not the price that you paid at import. So there's legal ways to do that. If you bought it, like there was a middleman or an agent that bought it in China, marked it up to you, you can actually import the goods at the price they paid, not the price you paid. You can deduct the portion, if you file it all correctly, and don't quote me on this because you want to get good legal advice, including from Flexport's team, but you can deduct the portion that's US made. But you don't just get to automatically do that. You have to like file all the right paperwork and stuff. And then importantly, if you import something, you pay duties, and then you later export a product with the same classification, you're owed a refund. on the first pass.
Okay. You get your import back.
Yeah.
The import duties you pay.
Yeah. So every year in the United States, 7 billion goes unclaimed. And that was pre these new tariffs. So it's presumably much higher. Yeah. So we help companies with that. We've been getting people like big checks back that haven't, and you can go back 5 years in time. So that's like a really important one. If you haven't done, it's called duty drawback. If you haven't done that, and other countries offer this too, most countries. So yeah, there's a lot of strategies. In fact, the one thing that people should really know is your data on all your past transactions with the U.S. government or with U.S. Customs it's your data. You have the right to it under the Freedom of Information Act. So you can pull your last 5 years of transactions from CBP. Now they'll give it to you in a very unusable format. I think like giant CSV dump, basically, maybe even on CDs. I forget, but they give you like this. Not useful. It is still your data, so it's useful, but you have to know how to clean it up. So we've built this interface that like visualizes all of this for you and shows you every transaction you've done in and out of the country. And then our experts kind of walk you through and be like, okay, here's our checklist. This is ways that we think we could maybe get you a refund. Now, Trump has lost the lawsuit on these new tariffs. It's going to appeal. So the oral arguments for that start on July 30th. Next month.
Is that at the Supreme Court level?
No, it's the level below the Supreme Court. So presumably if he loses again, it'll get appealed again to the Supreme Court. So I don't know enough how this works, but towards the end of the year is my imagination, is my guess that it will go to the Supreme Court.
Either way, it'll probably end up there.
Probably it ends at the Supreme Court, yeah. That will be really an interesting case. If they lose again, everybody gets a refund on all their duties. But they won't just refund it. You're then going to have to file paperwork.
Of course. Yeah, they're not going to like, here's a magic check in the mail.
Yeah. So it's going to be, and then it already takes like about a year. When you get one of these refunds from the government, it takes about a year to get your check.
Yeah.
When every single company in the country applies for a refund, you probably won't see the check for like 3 years. There's going to be so much fraud. Oh man, it's going to be kind of a total mess if they lose that lawsuit.
Where's traffic now? Is it back to normal? Is it down? Is it?
Volumes from China collapsed 60% down on April 9th, the day the duties hit, stayed down for 5 weeks. And then as soon as the Trump administration relaxed the duties on China to 30% instead of 145, it surged to 80% above pre-tariff levels. That lasted for 2 weeks, and then it came down. It's still above pre-tariff levels. I haven't studied enough the market data, and now I'm looking at Flexport data. And we have got 30% growth over last year. So then I start to figure, we're actually up again from the trough. Like it came down and now we're back up. But I think that's a Flexport thing. I think the market's shrinking again from the peak that we hit post-COVID. But our own volumes were like 30% year over year growth. So
what are the markers you look for that are like public information or that you have as proprietary information that are sort of indicators like, the economy is really good. Oh, we're going to hit some trouble. You know, one of the things that Buffett has always said is he looks at intermodal rail volume as a leading indicator for the economy. I'm curious, like given your aperture into everything.
I've never been like a macro person. I'm not an investor like that. So it doesn't matter to me that much. I guess Buffett's right, like the logistics data, but it's the international stuff is so, plus seasonality, there's a lot of weirdness lately in this tariffs data that is just like, I don't know if that means, you want to know what the consumers are doing ultimately. What are they buying and selling? And there's just a huge amount of noise. Like they didn't ship that much less or more because of consumer demand. That was like, cost and inventory forecasting. And so it's probably, if I had my access to any data, it would be the consumers, sales data from all the customers and inventory levels. I just don't know. The sales data, fine. I like public companies report on their sales. Inventory data, I've never understood. Like the U.S. government publishes these inventory metrics every month. Where do they get that? I have no idea. I haven't gotten any good economists to answer that. Look how they run a survey. I'm like,
interesting.
Is that valid data? Is that accurate? I know how hard it is to get accurate data out of my own company. So the idea of the government economists getting accurate data about all of the companies, I'm like always very skeptical on these things.
It's 100% correct.
I'm so skeptical on like big government data sets.
One of the things that you said that I came across that really stood out for me was when you're designing an operation, you're choosing your bottleneck. If the bottleneck appears somewhere you didn't choose it, you aren't running an operation, it's running you. Double click on that for a moment.
bottleneck is going to be, the point, the choke point, the point at which the limiting factor. And I think you're in a company, your bottleneck should always be customer demand. Should never be like bottleneck. Oh, I can't. Right now, we're bottlenecked in our customs team, our trade advisory team, the people that are helping solve these problems that I was describing around how much duties you owe and how to minimize it, how to be compliant. That team is super bottleneck. We didn't plan for a world that would require this much expert headcount. And it's hard to find these types of people that really know the space. So we're bottlenecked in a place that we didn't plan. The bottleneck should be, I don't have enough customers wanting my thing. You'd like that to be in a B2B environment. That should be the bottleneck. But if it shows up somewhere else, yeah, I'm not in control right now. It feels very uncomfortable. I'm like, I don't want to just hire more people, especially if it's a temporary surge. So it feels out of control and we need to get our handle on that. And I hate that. I want my problem always to be like, oh, I need to be more creative in my marketing and sales and like work on the pitch.